It was a quiet evening when Carson set up his fishing line by the edge of the lake, hoping for nothing more than a few trout and maybe a peaceful night under the stars. The mist clung low over the water, and the soft ripples seemed to lull him into a relaxed daze. As he sat there, lost in thought, something broke the surface of the water. A sound kind of like a stone splashing, only louder and heavier. Startled, Carson looked out, expecting perhaps a large fish or even an otter, but what he saw was nothing like that. The thing that emerged from the water was dark, wet, and misshapen. At first glance, he thought it was some giant frog, but as the creature slithered closer, the shape became more grotesque. Its leathery wings, dripping with the lake's water, stretched out unnaturally long, casting a shadow in the dim light. The wings flapped, and it lifted itself to the surface for just a moment, hovering above the lake. Carson froze. The creature's eyes, wide and gleaming, fixed on him, shining with an unnatural intelligence. It had no hind legs, just a long, sinuous body ending in a twisted tail that thralled behind it in the water. Its mouth opened wide, and he swore he could hear a high-pitched screech echo through the mist before it disappeared back into the depths. Carson didn't wait to see if it returned. He gathered his things and ran, never looking back. Even now, when he closes his eyes, he sees the leathery wings and that awful, open maw waiting beneath the surface. The topic of tonight's episode is none other than, we're going to try to pronounce it, the Llamhigyn Y Dwr. Llamhigyn Y Dwr, or also known as the Water Leaper. So from now on, we're going to call it the Water Leaper. Now, I know this one's actually from Wales. It's a Welsh. But I decided to include it as we probably won't have a Welsh series. So forgive me anybody who, doesn't believe it belongs here, but we're going to do it anyways. The Water Leaper, from Welsh folklore, is a creature that defies easy categorization. Imagine a grotesque hybrid between a giant bloated frog and a bat of all things. Standing about the size of a large dog, it has slick, amphibious skin that glistens as though it was always wet. Its body is unnaturally long and thin, tapering off where one would expect legs, but instead it possesses no hind limbs at all, just a whipping, muscular tail. The head is frog-like, with bulging, lidless eyes that seem to glow with an eerie phosphorescence in the darkness. Its mouth is wide and filled with rows of sharp, needle-like teeth, perfect for tearing the flesh or biting through fish nets. Let's hope it's the last. But its most terrifying feature? Its wings. These aren't the delicate wings of birds, or even the leathery ones of bats. These wings are thick, webbed, and strong, capable of carrying the water leaper out of the water with an unnatural grace before it plummets back into the depths with a splash that echoes for miles. They're powerful, propelling the creature through the air and under the water, where it hunts for unsuspecting prey. I mean, it sounds kind of like a stingray or something, doesn't it? I mean, somewhat, but the water leaper isn't just a terrifying water beast, though. It's an ancient one. According to the local legend, this creature has lurked in the lakes and rivers of Wales for centuries, long before the arrival of humans in the area. Some believe it's a cursed spirit, bound to the waters after a deal with dark forces gone wrong. You always hate it when those deals go wrong, but how many times have you ever heard about a dark deal going right? Others say it's a creature from the Otherworld, a place of malevolent spirits and dark magic, where it crossed into our realm through the thin veil between the two worlds. There are whispered tales of it haunting not just one lake, but many, traveling between them through underground rivers that connect the dark, still waters. It's said that wherever it resides, the fish are scarce, and the waters remain unnervingly still, as if all life beneath the surface is afraid of what swims above. Fishermen have long feared its presence, and old folk tales warn them to stay away from the waters where the mist clings too thickly, for that is where the water leaper awaits. The creature's motivations remain unclear. Some say it feeds on fish, dragging them into its cavernous mouth with its sharp teeth. Others claim it has a darker hunger for the souls of those unfortunate enough to cross its path, pulling them into the water, never to be seen again. Carson wasn't the only one to come face to face with it. There are many stories passed down through the generations, each a little more chilling than the last. Tessa had always loved the serenity of the lakeside trail. As the sun dipped behind the hills, she would walk there to clear her head, allowing the cool evening breeze to wash away the worries of the day. It was her time, just her, the lake, and the fading light. But this evening there was something oppressive about the air. The mist had rolled in heavier than usual, and the silence was almost too complete. Too unnatural. She walked slowly, her footsteps muffled by the soft earth beneath her boots. The usual chorus of frogs and crickets was gone, replaced by an eerie stillness. Her skin pricked with unease, but she continued, convincing herself it was just her imagination. That's when she heard it. A soft, almost flapping sound, like the wings of a large bird. But this was no ordinary bird. The flaps were too slow, too deliberate, and it seemed to echo across the water. Tessa paused, her heart skipping a beat. She turned, peering through the thickening mist. It emerged from the fog, slowly at first, a dark shape hovering just above the surface of the water. Her breath caught in her throat. It looked like a giant frog at first, its body glistening with moisture, but then her eyes were drawn to the wings. Bat-like, massive, and dripping with water. They flapped rhythmically, each motion sending a slight gust of wind towards her. Her eyes widened as the creature drew near. Its grotesque form hung suspended in the air, as though the very mist itself supported it. And then it did something she would never forget. It seemed to fix its gaze on her, those glowing eyes, large and unnatural, locked onto her with a malicious intelligence. It made no sound, no screech, nor growl, only the wet flapping of its wings. Suddenly, it dropped back into the water, disappearing beneath the surface without a trace. But the ripples it left behind told Tessa everything. She wasn't imagining it. It was real, and whatever it was, it had been watching her. She turned and ran, the sound of those slow, methodic flaps haunting her for days afterwards. Now he joined Bryce. He had lived near the lake his entire life, running a small cattle farm on its northern edge. It was a good life, simple, even quiet. But that summer something strange began to happen. His cattle, which usually stayed within the sturdy fences he'd built, began disappearing. One by one they were simply gone, with no signs of a struggle, no tracks leading away from the pasture. At first, he thought it was thieves, or possibly wolves, but there were no broken gates or tracks from the predators. Then one night, as he sat on his porch sipping his evening tea, he noticed movement near the water. The lake, usually still in the moonlight, was disturbed by a faint ripple, followed by a shadowy gliding across its surface. He squinted, trying to make sense of what he was seeing, when something massive rose from the water, dragging what looked like a large shape behind it. His breath caught as he realized what it was pulling. A cow. One of his missing cows, but it wasn't just the cow that terrified him. It was the creature that hauled it into the water. It was like nothing he'd ever seen. Wings, dripping and slick, unfurled as the creature struggled with its prize. Its body was grotesquely elongated, thin, and wet, with no hind legs to speak of. It let out a low, guttural sound before disappearing into the depths with the cow in tow, leaving nothing but a faint trail of ripples and a horrible silence. Bryce couldn't shake the horror of what he'd witnessed. The next morning, when he went to the water's edge, all he found was a streak of blood on the grass, leading straight into the lake. That was it. No tracks, no body, just the unmistakable evidence that something unnatural had taken his livestock. He moved his farm away from the lake shortly after and warned anyone who would listen to stay far away from its shores at night. Now let's check in with Elwyn. Elwyn had always been a skeptic, dismissing the local legends as mere superstition. As a marine biologist, she was well versed in creatures that live in the lakes and rivers of her region. But one evening, while conducting research along the lake's edge, her beliefs were challenged in the most horrifying way. She was collecting water samples when she noticed the odd behavior of the fish. They were congregating near shore, moving frantically, as if something was disturbing the water. Curiously, she crouched down, peering into the murky depths. That's when she saw it. A long, dark shape gliding beneath the surface. At first she thought it was a large fish, maybe even a sturgeon. But then the shape grew larger, impossibly large. Suddenly, the water erupted and the creature burst from the lake. Elwyn fell back, scrambling away as the massive winged form hovered above her. Its eyes were fixated on her, glowing with an unnatural light. She could see every grotesque detail of its body, the slick, amphibious skin, the long, writhing tail, and the way its wings flapped with a slow, deliberate rhythm. It opened its mouth, revealing rows of needle-like teeth, and let out a screech that echoed through the night. Elwyn froze, unable to move as the creature hovered above her, its presence filling her with a primal terror she had never experienced before. And then, just as quickly as it appeared, it vanished back into the lake, leaving only the sound of its wings flapping in the distance. Shaking, She gathered equipment and fled, her mind racing with the impossible truth of what she had just witnessed. The water leaper, with its grotesque form and malevolent intent, has been a source of terror for those who dwell near the lakes and rivers of Wales for centuries. Whether it's a remnant of ancient curses, a creature from the Otherworld, or simply a monster of nature, one thing remains clear. It's best to stay far away from the misty shores where it calls home. If you ever find yourself near a quiet lake, and the mist is just a little too thick, and the water, well, let's just say it's a little too still, you better take heed. You might not be as alone as you think. The next splash you hear may be just the water. It could be something far darker, lurking just beneath the surface. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Lunitar's Legends, Lore, and Lies. If you enjoyed this tale of terror and want to hear more, make sure to follow the podcast. Subscribe onto YouTube. Leave a review. Share it with your fellow folklore enthusiasts. Give this a thumbs up if you're watching this on YouTube as a video. And if you want to support me, I do have a Patreon page, and you can find the link in the description. But until next time, keep your eyes open and your mind sharp, because you never know what might be lurking in the shadow.